Welcome to everybody in this open meeting. The Fondazione Cini, together with EPFL, represented here by Professor Frédéric Kaplan, and Factum Foundation, represented here by its president and founder, Adam Lowe. In the 2018, the founder created Archive, the Center of Excellence in the Advanced Technologies for Digitalization of the World Cultural Heritage and of the island of San Giorgio Monumental Architecture and Landscape. Today's meeting sees the protagonist of a special project, a very special project, dedicated to the 70 years of the Fondazione's life, talking about the processes and ambitions of the three-dimensional scanning of the island of San Giorgio. Every smallest corner of the monumental architecture, every single square meter of the whole island has been recorded. Before giving them the floor, I would like to thank to Lady Hamlin, who, through the trust she founded, supports the center's innovation and experimental activities, and who is here today with us for this special lesson. Thank you, Lady Hamlin. EPLF is Europe's most cosmopolitan technical university. It welcomes students, professors, and collaborators of more than 120 nationalities. EPFL has both a Swiss and international vocation and focuses on three missions: teaching, research, and innovation. Professor Frédéric Kaplan directs the PFL Digital Humanities Institute, comprising 5 research laboratories. He is also the president of the Time Machine Organization, a no-profit entity regrouping more than 600 institutions collectively building the first 4D mirror world. Factum Foundation for Digital Technology in Conservation is a non-for-profit organization founded in 2009 in Madrid. It works alongside its sister company Factum Arte, a multidisciplinarity workshop in Madrid dedicated to digital mediation in contemporary art and the production of facsimiles. The foundation was established to demonstrate the importance of documenting, monitoring, studying, recreating, and disseminating the world's cultural heritage through the rigorous developments of high-resolution recordings and rematerialization techniques. To all, very good work. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Renata. Thank you very much, Lady Hamlin, for supporting and encouraging and helping create Archive. Archive stands for the Analysis and Recording of Cultural Heritage in Venice. We really hope it's a model that's going to grow, but in the 3 years since we've been working here in Venice, we've been putting together a vast array of projects. I'm going to talk about some of these over the next hour, and then I'm going to hand over to Frédéric Kaplan to talk about how Factum Foundation, the Fondazione Giorgio Cini, and EPFL work together in an unusual collaborative model, which we hope is a model that we can grow over the years ahead into something very substantial. We started in 2018, but in the beginning of 2020, Venice was one of the first cities to be affected by the COVID pandemic. And obviously activities on the island had to stop. But while the pandemic has been a nightmare on many levels, it's also opened up many possibilities and many different ways of thinking about the importance of digital heritage. And effectively, Frédéric and I started talking quite early on, probably in March or in April, to say one of the possibilities is the island is empty of people. And another fact was that my team, who should really have been in Saudi Arabia, where they've been recording the rock-cut tombs and rock-cut inscriptions in Made Sala in Hegra and around the town of Alula. And in a way, this was a link between what Frédéric has been interested in for many years. So high-resolution recording of large-scale structures. In the case of Frédéric, the interest is in Venice, or in other ways that you can make the past and the present collide. So when we're talking about these things, the resolution must take us right down so we're able to study the chisel marks, the details within a surface, not just give you a 3D model. And I think the conversations that we started to have revolve around the fact that Factum normally records small objects and paintings with great degrees of detail. So if you look on the screen at the moment, you can see a project we did for Strawberry Hill House with the British Museum to record a silver bell made by Wenzel Jamnitzer. It's probably one of the most difficult objects we had to record. This is just before the beginning of archive. It's a bell with fine detail in silver. And it was scanned, well, it was recorded using macro photogrammetry. It was created as a 3D model and then turned into a facsimile, which is a silver bell. So I think the way we mediate and transform information underpins a lot of the conversations that Frédéric and I were talking about. And just as an aside, as I left Madrid on Friday, we're working on a major project with the artist Grayson Perry to try to revitalize bell production in England. So I love the fact that ideas tend to have a way of mutating and finding new forms and new lives. So Grayson Perry made the bell, which we hope will celebrate the end of COVID, which was then scanned, has been 3D printed, and now in collaboration with Pangolin Foundry in Gloucestershire, it will be made as a bell, and it'll be tuned by Nigel Taylor, who worked for 40 years at the Whitechapel Bell Foundry. So this is very much an assertion of how you keep craft traditions alive. But really, the conversation today is how you use technology to feed those different types of transforming and different ways of transforming and mediating data. So Otto and Pedro and Emmanuel from Factum and a team from EPFL arrived on the island, and we began a recording. So as it's a project that's part of Archive's mission to digitize not just the island, but more generally. And Archive basically, as we touched on a second ago, was set up with funding from Helen Hamlin's Trust and with the support of EPFL, Factum, and the Fondazione Giorgio Cini. In the first complete year, we were nominated and shortlisted by Apollo magazine for the Award for Digital Innovation. But we covered a whole lot of projects that have just been put into a book by the Cini Foundation. The second year it went on and was growing. There are a wide variety of projects which can be found both on Factum Foundation's website and on the website or on part of the Cini's website, which is devoted to archive. But really, what happened on the island is something that focused lots of questions about how technology can help us preserve cultural heritage, can help us rethink it, can help us engage with it in different ways, can raise key questions about what's involved in high-resolution recording, what it gives us that, for example, photography doesn't give us. As Renata said in her introduction, we set out to record the whole island in 12 days with LIDAR scanning and with photogrammetry, but to mix with other technologies that we've been carrying out on the island over the last 6-7 years, but particularly in the last 3 or 4 years. Particularly in the no, 1 second. No, I got a malfunction. Sorry about that. I tried to stop the thing at a point where I wanted to show one very specific detail, and I'm going to try again, so I hope it doesn't repeat the same trick. But we recorded with LIDAR recording and photogrammetry, and the goal was to produce a model which didn't just give sexy, exciting looking technological images. No, okay, I apologize. This is something a bit tricky. I'm not going to be able to stop the presentation as it is, which I wanted to do from time to time. But basically, we want to find a way to really use these technologies to take our understanding of how to preserve the island and what is on the island to new levels. So the recording of the facade of the Basilica of San Giorgio was where we began. And if you look here, you can see on the inscription above the door that the inscription has clearly been changed. But the resolution at which we recorded it allows for a kind of study that's not easy unless you're on the island with scaffolding. So I think the beginning of the challenge was, what can we show? How can we show it in ways that are not normal or that we're not familiar with? So the photogrammetric recording of this figure has been inserted into the LIDAR recording of the general facade. I think I should say at this point, in the 12 days, we took 25,061 megapixel photographs, approximately. We recorded 60 billion, that's 60,000 million measured points with the LIDAR. And the EPFL team also recorded a vast amount of data. So I wouldn't want to quantify it, but I can say that the LIDAR data alone was 2.6 terabytes. We're talking a vast amount of information, which will have useful functions going forward for the study and preservation of the island. As you move into the church, we have these rather nice images that feel ethereal, but strangely at the same time, they sort of dematerialize the architecture. So for me, I love watching this kind of data for a while, but I constantly want more from it. So I don't see the recording of the island as an end in itself. We see it as the start of a new level of research. So I love the fact that in this very limited period of time, we could record the altar of the Basilica. So you can move right around it and zoom into it. We can move on past the altar into the choir. And here again, we can focus on the lectern and on the wood carvings that are around. And you can zoom in and see the object, not just as a photograph, but from different angles, and right in to the details of the carving on the wood. So I wish I could show you all this in real time, and I'm going to explain in a minute why that's difficult. But at this point, I want to say that we could record the carvings on the choir so they look as you move around them. These are not photographs, these are renders. But if I take the color off, you start to see some of the illusion. So with the color on, it looks coherent. With the color off, you see that the three-dimensional data is not what we would consider, in fact, in Foundation and within Archive, as being high resolution. If you look at a photograph like this that shows all the camera angles, all the white spots are different positions where photographs were taken. But here you can see that if you spent not 5 minutes recording a surface like this, but 1 day, you would be able to capture something that looks like the image on the right here. So you'd be able to capture right down into the cracks and the surface of the wood as a three-dimensional form and not just as a color render. This image I prepared to demonstrate the difference between LiDAR scanning that many, many people refer to as high resolution. And you can see on screens around the world, you can go to many websites now and you'll find LiDAR recordings. It's used a lot in architecture. And while it's a great tool, it's not high resolution. So the juxtaposition here between the same figure recorded on the facade of the Church of San Petronio some years ago. So we're looking at a comparison between LiDAR, which is a time of flight recording, and white light scanning, which projects patterns. But by bringing these two data sets together and by playing with them, we can sort of start to see spaces, in this case, that I'd never visited. So this is round the back of the basilica. We're understanding the relationship between the inside and the outside of a building. And we're being able to go into the crypt. So through this opening, it takes us down into the crypt. And this is where I think the beginning of some points we really started to get excited about. I mean, in the crypt, we were able to say, the water table in Venice is clearly problematic now. This crypt should not have water in it, but at an acqua alta above about 1.30 meters, the crypt starts to fill with water. So here we were able to take the LiDAR data and to actually extract three-dimensional models that allow us to look at and understand this space, to take measurements, to consider what happens when the water enters a building. So in the previous image, you could see electrical wires going into the water. And obviously, this is very problematic for the preservation, very problematic for potential fires, but also it shows how this dynamic relationship between the land and water is presenting problems that need to be addressed as a matter of urgency. Soon after the recording in June last year, I did a radio interview, which was listened to by some people in Boulder, Colorado, who have a new sensor for monitoring the movement and the dynamic nature of the relationship between water and land. And they contacted us and we talked with the Cini. And as part of an archive research project, we've put the first sensor overlooking the water in front of the Cini. And what's effectively happening is that the sensor is detecting unique radar signatures in reflected light, which enables it to calculate the height of the water, the wind, and the frequency of the waves. All of this data is being data logged 24/7. And we hope that this can add to, can supplement the extensive work that's already being done in the lagoon and to monitor the relationship between water and land in Venice. And I think the nature of close range recording, close range monitoring, close range data logging that allows a dynamic and active relationship to be observed between land and water is a very exciting moment. And it's something that already has raised a large number of conversations on the island amongst the people who are charged with looking after the building. So on San Giorgio, there is a specific problem when the water rises above 1.30 meters. That's the critical point here on the island of San Giorgio Maggiore. So the question arose is, would it be possible to take this data, this dynamic data, and have an advanced warning system? Can we bring all of these, the wave frequency, the tide, the water height, and the wind direction? And could we have an alarm system that could alert people 2, 3, 4 hours before the water gets to this height? And for me, that's a very exciting proposition that comes out of a true research project. I mean, one of the things that always disappoints me is that many research projects, when you're filling in grant applications or research applications for funding, you have to enter the outcome before you've done the research. And it's always struck me as a major failing of academia, that the only way you get funded is if you already know the outcome of your research. And I think the point I'd love to make here is that when we recorded the island, we had no idea what the outcome would be. We knew what some of the goals might be, but the fact that Divirod appeared, that they have a remarkable sensor, that, as you can see on the graph, which was done just a few days ago, we're tracking day and night, 7 days a week, the dynamic nature of the water. So will we be able to observe the speed at which Venice is sinking? Well, because we had no idea of what was going to happen, I'm going to do a very, very quick aside. So Venice is sinking, and another one of Factum Foundation's projects is in the north of Finland, where we've acquired an Alvar Aalto building. And just last week, using aerial lidar, we recorded the building with the Arctic Drone Lab. But the point I want to make here is Venice is sinking perhaps 4 or 5 millimeters a year, while Oulu is rising through something called glacial rebound, because the ice is melting. So Oulu is rising at an estimated 2 centimeters a year. Now, that's an alarming sense of change in the world we inhabit. So can we bring technology to bear to help us understand some of these changes? So these are questions. We endlessly want to ask questions. I mean, back inside the bell tower of the church, which incidentally looks remarkably like the concrete structure on the inside of the silo, we're back to a LiDAR recording. But previously on the island, Factum worked with the Fondazione Cini and Michele De Lucchi on an exhibition about Piranesi. And I think looking at some of our LiDAR data, it starts to look remarkably like some of the magical images that Piranesi made. And I think dialogues across time are very much something that I want to raise as we now move from the outside and go rather alarmingly through the wall, through the keystone on the arch and into the Palladian cloister. So I've had the great privilege of knowing, I'm going to come to the Longheda staircase on the right in a minute, but I've had the great privilege of walking through and seeing this cloister at many times of day and night over many years. And of course, you watch the problems that the acqua alta causes for the box hedges and the preservation of the gardens. But you also see, which I'm going to show you any second, the problems that the salt causes to the stucco that covers the walls in the cloister. And what we're able to do is to monitor exactly what's happening. So this is an area of salt damage and an area of restoration. And we were able to start looking at this in great detail. We were able to take areas of bad damage. Now, here the render looks a bit plasticky. It doesn't look like stucco, but the goal here is to show you the difference, to show you what's actually happening to the wall. So one of the beauties of long-term projects is you can actually monitor specifically what we're doing. And here is the same area recorded in June 2020. And then I thought it was a good idea while we were talking about this presentation to record it again in 2021. So this is actually almost exactly a year later. It's June 2021. And I took some more photographs yesterday. So the sort of finger of gesso that's coming up in the middle, of stucco that's coming up in the middle, is just about to detach from the wall. And I think monitoring change is one of the key things. So the goal of this talk is not to go through all of the things that we're working on, but I would like to touch very, very fast on perhaps 12 or 13 very big issues that underpin many of the things we're doing here. So condition monitoring is important. Dealing with issues of repatriation. So obviously the wedding, the Veronese painting that we returned in digital, in facsimile form to the refectory, which I'll talk about in just a second. Research, building in-depth layered archive, providing access to inaccessible sites, reuniting objects that have been fragmented and dispersed around the world, dealing with issues of loans and ownership between museums, organizing and curating exhibitions, coming up with theatrical applications that allow the young generation to really engage with culture in a way that's not superficial, nor does it feel thrust upon them. So they have to somehow take it as their own and learn from it. Dealing with digital restoration, recreating lost objects, transferring skills and technologies, and most importantly of all, ensuring the data is properly archived and properly accessible. And this is really the challenge behind everything we've been doing on the island. So moving from Palladio's cloister into the refectory, the first thing I always notice is the staircase that you go up. So it tells you actually that the refectory itself has had a lot of layers of restoration. But Factum's first main project, as I mentioned one second ago, was commissioned by Pasquale Gagliardi, the Secretary General until a year and a half ago, was to commission the recording in the Louvre and the recreation of the painting which once occupied the end wall of Palladio's great refectory. The project really began when Pasquale organized a projection of the painting on the end wall. But strangely, that was disappointing because you couldn't see the space and you couldn't really see the painting as a material object. So our first collaboration with the Cini back in 2006 and into 2007 was to build the equipment to record in the Louvre, to digitize the whole of this vast 10-meter by 7-meter painting back in Madrid, to put it all together, to make it as a facsimile, to bring it back and install it into the end of the refectory. And this photo for me has really been the beginning of a long, detailed dialogue with some of the things that are here on the island. And I've been coming for many years, and I get amazed that there are more and more and more things within the Cini's archives. There are things that I still don't know. And I find the real excitement about digitizing and making things available is realizing the richness of culture that exists here on this island, in Venice, of course, and then everywhere. So there is so much that needs to be understood and recorded. If we look at The Wedding at Cana, the painting by Veronese, in situ, as it was depicted by Coronelli when he made this engraving, you can see that the monks' tables down the side, the head table where the abbot would sit underneath the figure of Christ, that there's a total dialogue going on between the painting and the space. And that dialogue raises many questions. So when we first started working, everyone said, what was on the floor? Because when we recorded it, there was just a red marble floor that had been put in the 1950s. Everyone said, there should be a lantern window, and there's the ghosts of it on the outside of the building at the top. And it seems to me possible that Veronese may have wanted to play with the architectural space, but then realized the contraluce meant you couldn't see the painting if you had the lantern window. So they didn't. But the beauty is that the painting was designed for this building with this light. And at about 6 o'clock in the early summer evenings, the light in the refectory echoes the light in the painting. And the left-hand side of the painting becomes the center of the composition, the thing you look at. And on the left-hand side of the painting, you have an extraordinary cluster of figures with a lot of things going on. And there's the bride with this strange gesture surrounded by people looking at her. So you're being asked to look at a very, very complex picture, a complex spatial picture in different ways. This wonderful figure dropping roses that describes the space on the right-hand side. So the painting and the building exist together. And when we unveiled the painting in 2007, you had a crowd full of people, full of Venetians, emotional, ecstatic, the painting's back. If you look at it now in the Louvre, everyone's facing with their back to the painting, except a few people taking selfies, where you need to face that to get the Mona Lisa in the background. And the painting has none of its meaning. So part of the discussion about what happened here was what happens to an image when it gets relocated. So the painting in the Louvre is undoubtedly the original painting, heavily restored, hanging at the wrong height, in a gold frame, between two doors, not occupying the right space. But the painting in Venice has an authenticity in its space. And the relationship between originality and authenticity is something that we come back to time and time again in all the work in archive. So I loved seeing today, because looking after an island like the Cini is a dynamic, like San Giorgio Maggiore, is a dynamic process. And when we recorded the well in the cloister of the Cypresses, it was dirty and dark. Now it's been cleaned. As we move back through from the second cloister into Palladio's cloister, I want to focus attention for 1 second on the materiality of 3D data. So I hope this is going to stop here. So this is a render done in a software called Unreal Engine that allows us to see the thing not as a ethereal type of form, but as something more physical. For the last 20 years and ongoing, and we're still doing it, the recording in the tomb of Seti I has gathered data that allows us to work with the new gaming technologies to produce three-dimensional forms that actually look like the tomb. I feel for the first time when I'm looking at this that I'm able to learn from this. I'm not looking at the digital data, I'm looking at the object. And that's the point where we're here, where Frédéric and I, and Frédéric will talk a lot more about what we can do with the data, but where, we're at a point that if we can look at it in different ways, if we can control the lighting, we can really see it with fresh eyes, and we can raise a whole new level of scholarship. But in the computer gaming world, to make a computer game using a program like Unreal Engine, you need a large number of people working for many years with budgets that are like Hollywood budgets. And the extraordinary thing is that in culture, you never have Hollywood budgets. You never even have anything more than barely sustainable budgets. And I think the important thing in what I'm showing you is that this is Tutankhamun's tomb being done a bit like a video game. So I find this makes me a little bit sick and dizzy, because watching the world moving through someone else's hand movements is really quite alarming. But actually the point here is we've got so much data. You can move around this. You can see that that ankh was painted in the 20th century because all of the microbacteria is splashed on. You can take away the color. You can study the sarcophagus. You can really engage with it. So back in Cini, we are doing the same things. So as we move in to the Longhena staircase, we look at the floor. I've always been obsessed with this floor because it looks so like the floor in the Veronese painting. The pattern's a bit different, but the colors are there. And this is a render. So we've got data here that allows you to study the floor in great detail. You go up the stairs and you can move in this mix. So here, I mean, people who know about 3D things, we're mixing different color palettes. So there's some discordant things going on. But we're moving up this great Hollywood staircase. And as you get to the top of it, you encounter one of my favorite objects, which is a table, which are the tables that I think could well have been in the refectory. Some people say they were, some people say they weren't. But we're able to record. This is all within our 12 days. The table, so you can see it, you can measure it. You can see how it was built. You can understand how it was preserved and how it's been restored at different times. We can walk down the corridor. Each of these pieces of furniture we recorded. And as you go into the president's office and the Secretary General's office, into the presidential rooms, you'll see a large number of pictures. The reality is that Archive has many, many years of recording to record all of these pictures at the resolution that we would like to record them. But the resolution we'd like to record them is this. So here you have Carlos Bayard working with a group of students from Columbia University who were scanning the paintings. So the little Virgin and Child that's behind Carlos, we've scanned it completely with color and 3D, so you can see every punch mark. You can zoom into this, and we've got a proper recording. Also during COVID, we started thinking about paintings in Venice that were very important, that are split up. And this Carpaccio with the two women on a balcony, we recorded at the same time. And what I love on the right here, you'll see that's actually the bottom half of a painting, of which the top half is in the Getty. And we're now recording the top half of that painting as soon as I can get a team to America to record it within the Getty. On the left-hand side of the screen, I'm not going to go into this now, but I want to touch on it for Frédéric later on. We're working with Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland on machine learning software. So we recorded the El Greco Annunciation that's in the collection of Banco Santander, and also the El Greco Baptism. Both of these paintings were originally from the Hospital of Cardinal Tavera in Toledo. But this one was also cut up, and the top half is in Athens. But with the machine learning software, we're trying to use high resolution data to actually identify the hand of different people working on this painting. The hand of El Greco, the hand of Jorge Manuel, his son, the hand of the studio assistants, the hands of the restorers who've touched it since. So we can start to identify different patterns within the high frequency information of the 3D data. We recorded a large number of sculptures. These were all done during the 12-day recording. We recorded frames. So this is a frame on a Tintoretto. And what I'd like to draw attention to here is, if you look, the photogrammetry was able to capture the carving on the frame reasonably well as a three-dimensional form, but it couldn't deal with the blackness and the glossiness of the painting. So what we'd really need to do there is use technology to rethink it. And one of the examples of doing that is currently on show. It went on show last week in Compton Verney in England in an exhibition about Grinling Gibbons. And this is Grinling Gibbons' carving based on Tintoretto's painting of the crucifixion from Squalo San Rocco. And for me, the challenge to record something that's just over 1 meter wide with this intricate carving, for which Grinling Gibbons is rightly famed. It's the 300th anniversary of his death. I would love it if people come out of the Grinling Gibbons exhibition saying, Grinling Gibbons isn't just a great carver, he's a great sculptor. So I think there's a way of rethinking what people do and how they are. I mean, the ceramics in the cupboard, I would love to record fully. But moving now into what's called the Sala del Soffitto, where there's an extraordinary painted, sculpted roof. This we recorded fully. So this we've actually, I think it's probably in the public domain now, a browser where you can look at the three-dimensional data and the color data. But one of the things that happened very soon after we'd finished the work was Massimo Altieri said there were some cracks in the boathouse. So we were able to look at our data and provide for Massimo and for the architects who are looking at doing the restoration of this building, the presidential rooms. You have the ground floor, the first floor, and the ceiling plan. And this is now data that's already gone to be practically used. So if this had to be recorded to study the work that needs to be done, it would have been quite expensive. But it's something that exists as part of the project. In the Longhena Library, I've always loved the Longhena Library because it was largely reconstructed in the 50s when they did the restoration. But some of the figures are original, some of the wood is original. But this library enables us, in a way, it's attached to the great library in the Manica Lunga, which we also recorded, but I'm not going to show here. But we were able to capture some of these figures at resolutions that enable them to be studied meaningfully. Of course, with more time, with scaffolding, with different access, we can do much more. But I think here, this figure, it's probably the first time there's been good recording that allow you to see it. It's high up. What I'm going to talk about now is the work that is happening a lot in archive at a closer level, if you like, not just recording the buildings, but recording the contents. So recording books is something Factum has done over many years, since the first experimental work with Ian Christie Miller on a system for recording books in the Biblioteca Nacional in Madrid when they were open at about 45 degrees. We also are studying vellum pages from books by scanning their surface, by looking at the incisions and the indentations with transmitted and reflected light that allows you to study watermarks or changes. With the Cini for the exhibition of Mindful Hands, we made a facsimile of the miniature officiolo that is one of the jewels of manuscript painting. But it's so tiny, we had to think about how we could do it. And the results, I mean, here you can see the size of the page compared to a 10-cent piece, 10 cents euro piece. And in the exhibition, we had an exact facsimile that people could handle. So for me, one of the difficulties about looking at books in exhibition is you can't touch them. But being able to sit here and go through the pages of this book in a binding that's almost identical to the original is magic. And that's really when Frédéric and I started talking more about the creation of archive, started looking at how to record the phototeca, which again, I'm going to leave Frédéric to talk about the contents of this. But over a period of probably 2 years, the entire phototeca of approximately a million double-sided objects has been recorded here on the island using the replica scanner that was built specifically in response to the needs. And what I love is how things are totally present. So tomorrow, the second replica scanner is on its way to Turin to be installed to record the Italgas archive. So it's spreading. It's a fast method of high resolution recording of double-sided documents. The recording of books requires specific skills, and with Dagestan, with the archive of ethnography and archaeology, we built a scanner to record the Islamic manuscripts. We did it in collaboration with Jevudin Magomedov's Perry Foundation. And we've recorded now about half of the Islamic manuscripts. I say they, because it's a total transfer of skills and technology, and all the work is being done in Makhachkala, in Dagestan, by a local team from the archive, but with remote access support from Factum in Madrid to ensure that everything goes well. We've also, while we're there, come across a collection in the mosques, the madrasas, and with the Islamic scholars of about 35,000 Islamic manuscripts from probably the 9th until the 19th century. The earliest and greatest excitement for us here was finding a palimpsest written in Georgian script underneath a 12th century Sufi manuscript, which tells us that the parchment was approximately 7th century parchment, and that had been scraped off and reused. And for me, the joy of finding these things, the excitement of knowing that the technology is actually out there doing things, is the core motivation for doing it, and for writing the software to the operating software for the scanning systems, working with extraordinary people like Sheikh Jumar al-Majid in Dubai, who's put in a complete restoration workshop to preserve the Islamic manuscripts in Dagestan, working with Oxford University to record books. All of these are archive-related projects. They're Factum Foundation projects now related to what we're doing here. And I think the expansive way in which archive opens the doors for many things to happen that are much bigger than a small team of people here on San Giorgio can do. So we have to train people. We have to ensure the technologies are shared. But I love the experimental work with digital technology. So here we scanned the so-called Book of Roger in the Bodleian Library, which is an Ottoman copy of a probably 12th century document, which formerly had been used to make, or had been drawn from, the famous 2-meter in diameter silver tray made by Aladrisi for Roger II, the Norman king in Sicily. So I think this wonderful multicultural sense of Europe, as well as multinational working together, is something that's very exciting. I'd like to, for the first time, I think, mention, I think I can now, a new extension of what we're doing in archive. So we're going to be running a year-long project, which I like to think of as Archeox. So the analysis and recording of cultural heritage in Oxford. So this is the Gough map. We recorded this in three dimensions at the request of Jerry Broughton and Nick Millay at the Bodleian Library. But very rapidly, it got picked up and is now part of a project that's being run by Catherine Delano-Smith to really study the map. And Catherine Delano-Smith's just coming to the end of a 2 years Leverhulme funding. And I think it will be extended for another 2 years, because there's an exciting moment. By studying the three-dimensional data, they're able to ascertain that the Gough map may not be the original map from which other maps are produced, but may be a derivative map, because the pouncing marks only indent the surface, don't go through. So there's a very interesting discourse that's growing up, coming out of the use of data. So part of the project that we're going to try and run or that we're running with the Bodleian is to look at, can we scan, normally we're scanning at about 100 microns on something like the Gough map with the Lucida scanner that was designed and built in Factum by Manuel Franquelo. But now we're moving further. And so we're looking at making little shallow indents in the surface of paper and seeing what level of data we can capture. And using confocal microscopy, we're able to capture a lot. But the Nanovia confocal microscope and profilometer really, is an expensive tool that has limitations. I mean, it's an amazing method of recording surface down to maybe 20 microns. But by mixing the Lucida data with photometric stereo, so the difference between photogrammetry and photometric stereo is that in photometric stereo, we move the light source rather than the camera. We're able to record right down, so we can read the similar impressions in the surface that we can capture with the Nanovia. And for me, this is the real excitement. In Madrid at the moment, we're doing the same thing with the Glossa Similiensis, which is really the beginning of Spanish language. So it's the first proper grammatic work in Spanish to see if we can find new palimpsests and new subtle marks. We're working with the Middle East Falconry Archive on making digitally accessible all the works on falconry. And this summer we were in Somaliland recording Islamic manuscripts there using the same technologies. Back in the Cini, we're very excited about what can come out of studying tapestries. So the Cini has a great collection of early tapestries. And by chance, in 2019, not by chance, but we were working with the Victoria and Albert Museum to scan the Raphael cartoons at millimetric level, so at about 100 microns. And the beauty to me to suddenly be able to see these as objects led us to produce a facsimile of one of them that was shown in Rome at the beginning of 2020, and that's going to be shown again in Vicenza at an exhibition on Raphael as an architect. But it's led to conversations with Arnold Nesselrat and others. So we recorded one of the tapestries that are in Mantua. And the goal here is to start studying the relationship between the cartoons and the tapestries that were woven from them. And it's this kind of primary research that I really love. Moving out and into the garden. We haven't yet recorded all of the garden because the trees were in leaf when we were there. But we did move around and we did record the sculptures that are in the gardens. And again, I think the richness of the Cini collection and the extraordinary objects you find here never cease to fascinate me. So round behind the room of tapestries, you find an extraordinary bust of Ezra Pound that was originally made by Henri Gaudier-Brescia, but was then remade by Isamu Noguchi. And I don't know why it's on the Cini. So one of the things that we would love to look into now is why this sculpture's here. But this has been recorded using photogrammetry. So if anything ever happened to it, you have an exact record that you can refer back to. And we could, from the data here, rematerialize this, which is the sort of thing, if I had time, I'd like to do just to demonstrate it and put it beside the Noguchi. So you have the Gaudier-Brescia, the Noguchi copy of the Gaudier-Brescia, and a rematerialization of the Noguchi copy of the Gaudier-Brescia. But just before lockdown, as a very exciting project for me, the Niccolò dell'Acque sculptures in Bologna. I mean, we work very closely in Bologna, and in collaboration with Archive, there was an exhibition which actually opened the day of lockdown. So I think it was the 12th of March, 2020. And we did the recording of these amazing terracotta figures for that show. And I think with more time, I would love to talk to you for an hour alone about what came out of the recording of these figures. Right now, we have a very, very interesting project in collaboration with the Gallery dell'Accademia to record all 9 busts by Daniel da Volterra of Michelangelo. So today, Pedro is heading to Milan and then on to Rimini to do the last 2. And this will enable us to study each of those busts and possibly to say, this is a derivative cast from this one. This one looks like it's earlier than that one. This one looks like it's a copy, not a cast. So really to go in depth, and in the same way we're doing a project with Sharon Hecker with the Medado Rosso sculptures to do the same, to look and see. He was working as an artist, playing with these things. Last week in the Musée Correr, in collaboration with the Kunsthistorisches Museum, Archive installed a copy of Titian's Sapienza. So the original painting has been loaned to the exhibition and the copy is going to be on display in the Correr. So really the question is, for me, what happens next? And what happens next is we have to spread the word. So the teaching we're doing, the transfer of skills and technologies has to step up. We have to expand the recording we're doing here within Archive, and we have to increase the team. We have to make it a global mission, not just a local mission. So here, Otto is teaching in Saudi Arabia, but some of the people he was training there were then brought back to Madrid in collaboration with the Jamil Foundation to have further training. And we really want to demonstrate how, as we're transferring skills into the hands of others, we can also supply them with the software. So the center is about the analysis and recording of cultural heritage. I've been talking to you a little bit about the recording of cultural heritage. And really, EPFL and Frédéric are focused much more on the analysis. I mean, of course, there are no hard and sharp lines in the collaborations. But Frédéric, I'd love to hand over to you now to follow on and talk about it. But I think you can see that with a small number of people working in a very focused way for 11 working days on the island, we actually managed to capture a large quantity of the buildings inside and outside, and the sculptures and the surface details at resolutions that's meaningful. That was 12 days recording. It's probably been several hundred man days processing in Madrid. If we wanted to make this into a virtual model, you could move around and change the lighting in real time, you would need hundreds of people working for several years. So I think we're looking at how these things can be done. So Frédéric, can I hand over to for you to talk about all the work that EPFL is doing?
Sure, with pleasure, Adam. Let me know if I can share my screen. Do you see my screen? Yep.
Yeah.
And do you hear me well? Okay. Thanks a lot. Thanks to all of you. I'm sorry not to be in Venice with you, but it's a pleasure to see you. At this occasion. And thanks a lot, Adam, for this wonderful presentation. We're just hearing you. On top of the voices. Okay, I'd just like to start essentially on. Oops, there's a bit of noise. Sorry.
Accumulate tutto sulla testa. Uno o due ci devono sotto. Se ti pare che sono pochi, dovrebbero trasferirne qualcuno dall'altro lato.
I think we need to just cut the microphone off. Aldo. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think it's important that just to insist that what Adam has presented is absolutely unique and absolutely new compared to many of the things you may have seen at different places. And I will try to convince you that it's really the first step towards a radical paradigm shift. This means also there's a lot of work still to do on the software side, but the type of full building high resolution recording that you've been seeing is opening to many new ideas. And so first, I'll say a couple of words about the concept of mirror world, because this is probably one of the terms we could use to describe the initial architecture that Adam has shown. So what is a mirror world? So it's a very simple, very intuitive idea. I mean, if you like, you have at the scale of a building, at the scale of a city, a full 3D mock-up, 3D model of that particular places, ideally at very high resolution so that it makes some form of sense. And as it's a 3D model, and as it's digital, it has, of course, by nature, a lot of very natural features. One is that this information, which is recorded, can itself be annotated, can be segmented, can be analyzed in various ways, all things you cannot do at all with the real world. And it's just that the information which is used for annotating, which we have, for instance, with the web, in which it's the text which is annotated. Now it's actually this double version, this digital twin of the real world. And the other aspect, which also I think was very clear in Adam's presentation, is that as soon as you have a 3D model, immediately it becomes very natural to do other types of recording, and I'm sure the effect of salts on some part of the island. We may also go back in the past and see some previous recording which were there, and immediately you end up to not be anymore in a 3D model, but be in a 4D model. Of course, what is complex is that it's not the entire recording, it's not a succession of equal recording that will create a 4D model, but it's partial overlapping of various recordings which were done at different interval. Knowing also that when you do a recording like the 3D recording we just talking about, it's not done instantaneously. I mean, Adam insisted rightfully that it was done in a record time, which is 12 days. Still, you know, it's not a picture. It's 12 days, so this is its temporal resolution. And that may also be important to consider if you want to model from a 4D perspective. So you have this new type of resources, I mean, this 4D model, and on that basis, there are many things you can do. I mean, you can study them to produce new knowledge, understanding, I mean, what were the type of transformation, and you saw that the type of question one may ask depend a lot on the scale. I mean, you can do very fine detail linked with art history or actual global view of the place to understand more, maybe in terms of urban planification. You can use, I mean, this type of model and its evolution to take decision, and that's very important in terms for urban planning, for instance. And you can, of course, imagine other types of let's say, interactions for creative industry, where you can have either immersive or other forms of way of exploring the data, like this type of elements you were actually seeing in this current project. So several questions, which are, now that we have this initial large-scale recording, extremely important to answer. I mean, how can we store and access such big digital twin? How can we segment it and interpret it in a way that will make it progressively not a single large set of data, but a structured set of data? And how can we make this structured set of data interactive? So I'm going to try to give you some hints about how we can go in this different direction, knowing that this is just the beginning, I think, of a long-term research that will be the basis for a absolutely radical new type of information structure. So the question about storage and access. The thing which was clear from what you saw on Adam's presentation is how much that model is multi-scale. I mean, you have some extremely high resolution recording of single statue, along with general recording of the entire island. That, just to show it now a bit from the inside, I can actually show it to you by actually zooming into the cloud points of the model itself, which is showing you here, not in the beautiful let's say, re-rendered images that Adam was showing, but really in terms of a skeleton of information, the type of high resolution you can have here in that particular cases with the detail of a part of the basilica. I mean, I can still zoom in and still you see there are hundreds of thousands of points at these extremely high resolutions. So this is, I think, extremely important, but also extremely challenging, because you need a way of storing this information that would permit to actually access it in an efficient manner, whatever the scale. And the first thing I need to make clear is that it's impossible that you download that information directly on any computer you have at home, because that's too big. And so if you want to actually make it accessible through any type of structure, you will need in a way or another to create what is called a client-server architecture. You will need to have at some point a client, for instance, a web browser, which is saying, I want to see just a part of that very, very big model. Please show me what is relevant to my viewing. But the thing which is challenging is that could be a question about the entire island or the detail of a single part. So you need to arrange your point in a way which makes sure it's extremely rapid to access a given subpart of the data. So I'm going to try to explain that in a very simple manner. But, I mean, it's not, we don't have enough time here to go into the very fine technical detail, but the underlying idea is quite simple. If you have a cube like this, you can divide it into 8 smaller cubes. If you divide, I mean, by 2 each of the part of the cube, you end up with 8 smaller cubes. That means that whatever point is in that big cube, it is also in one of the 8 cube which are inside. That means I can give a number from 1 to 8 to that particular point, like the one you saw before. And I can do this again. I will take that smaller cube and actually redivide it into 8 smaller cubes. And again, my point, whatever, wherever it is always somewhere in this 8 smaller cube, which means that if I'm doing that over and over again, I end up with my point in 3D with a single number like this one, only composed of, it's almost like a normal decimal number, except that there's only 8 value. You never have 9s or 0 in that particular number. And the thing which is interesting is that imagine 2 points which are part of the same column on the basilica. They will be more or less, if I consider the entire church to be a big cube, in one of the smaller cube, which are they will be together. That means that it's exactly like real numbers. I mean, if I take 3 and 0.2, then I have a very coarse resolution. It's a very big cube, and it's maybe fine if I'm looking at the island from maybe a plane. But if I go inside the island, inside the basilica, I mean, I will actually ending up more and more precise. But it's very easy for the computer to access all the elements which are contained in one of the small cubes. So this principle we've been applying with a small, of course, change that, of course, the Earth is not a cube, but it's a sphere. And so you need a bit to do a bit of geometry twisting here, but that's not so much changing anything about the process. And you end up with a situation where very easily you can ingest in a general architecture any new data, being a detail of a column or being a new recording of the city of Venice with a drone, and very easily querying all the points which are in a given cube, depending on the type of resolution you may have. So just to show you an example here we're starting, for instance, from data which are coming from what is called the SRTM, which is based on planes which have been looking at the Earth from very high altitudes. And then what you see here are the cubes that I was mentioning, but of course not with all their precision, because they just look at the resolution, which is 1 point per kilometer, more or less. And then the more you zoom in and the more you focus on Venice, the more progressively, I mean, you just query more detailed information about these, and you see that some new models here, it's drone-based model of Venice, which are just actually loaded, and so on and so forth. You have the possibility to display the most appropriate type of data depending on your level, on your resolution. And the thing which is important is that for the user, it's always the same access time. And for the people who are recording, any new recording will never slow the entire process. So this first step is really an extremely important aspect, because it ensures that whatever the level of recording, I mean, the more actually people spend time on San Giorgio Island, the model will just get finer and finer, but that will not have a direct effect on the viewer's time and viewer's recording. The same thing can be done with time. I mean, time can be divided here into binary intervals. I mean, and you can progressively characterize any type of this recording with a position, which is a particular cube, and a position in time, which means that only 2 numbers are sufficient to describe any type of recording. Here I'm illustrating the dynamic with another type of data, I mean, which is the type of recording we were by analyzing aerial photography of the city of Paris. And what you see here is progressively going back in time. Here we're in the 60s and the 50s and so on and so forth, where you can actually go and go back as you progressively load the model, which are adapted to the sections, the spatial temporal sections you are loading. So for San Giorgio now, we don't have, so many data in time, but actually it's possible to progressively add this type of data, even if they're not at the same form of very high resolution like the one we just been seeing, but it's possible to actually put them at the right place in this spatial temporal organization. So Adam was mentioning the importance for all these tools to be controlled, to be mastered. So this particular development of this client-server architecture was developed by one of the researcher at the DH lab called Niels Amel, and all the code was put and is maintained online under a GNU public license. That means that anybody that wants to install this server, do ingestions, try how much it's actually working for this own type of data, can do it. It's free of use. And for this reason also, this code is continually updated and actually permits to survive, even if it was developed first in an academic setting and then used maybe in other settings afterwards. So this is the first part. Storing the data, being able of welcoming any more data that will come, and progressively inventing a new way to access a form of computational model of this model that you've been seeing presented by Adam. Now, still, even it's stored this way, it's a large block of data. So we need to do something to progressively articulate these cloud points in more easily interpretable elements. And there are various ways of doing it. One way is actually to use many data we have about 2D information. For instance, in the case of San Giorgio, we certainly have a lot of descriptions of the various parts. This is actually how people manage any place now. Before there were 3D models. It's true also for the rest of the city of Venice. And on that basis, you can do some pretty straightforward geometrical computation, which permits to align, this 2D model with the 3D model. And one of the effects of these is that progressively you segment, for instance, the different walls. You can say, I'm interested in that subpart, and I can just use all the information I have on the 2D and project it on the 3D so that you isolate it. And this is extremely efficient because that permits to connect this huge object with all the information which were first gathered and structured on the 2D world. On that basis, once you've been doing this extraction, you can, of course, rectify, transform, do all the various movement that Adam was showing, but still showing them by moving virtually the camera. Here you can do it in an automatic manner, scaling in various ways, these different elements. And the other things you can do here, I'm illustrating on photos, but on 3D, it's more or less the same idea, is that you can progressively walk, now that you have these facade of these different walls, into some form of automatic decomposition of their structure. This is fine for interior walls. Here I'm showing an example based on the analysis of Venetian facades. So automatically, the information is restructured and it is segmented using a technique we've been developing, which is part also of another open tool called DH segment that was developed over the years, especially in fact, as part of the analysis of the Cini document. We had to deal with many types of documents, so we need a generic system for segmenting their content. We adapted this generic engine to work with architecture and facade, and now the system is able to recognize balcony and other types of system like this one. So you can apply automatically to give you a form of mask, which will serve as an interpretation scheme that you can put on the photo or on your 3D model to decompose its structure and saying, well, these are the windows, these are the doors, this is a painting on the wall, etc., etc., which permits then to make it computational. I mean, as an example here, we've been capable of regenerating in a procedural manner some parts of Venice using this method, but also in some cases, on some part on which we had only 2D information, being capable of making a guess, an hypothesis about what could be a potential structure, because the system now is understanding automatically the grammar of the facade, and it's getting better and better the more facade it sees. So we're entering again here in always more level of computational ability of your 3D model. Here, examples of regenerated part of the city. And in terms of interactivity, again, we could talk with a lot of ideas, but one thing I want to show is how much these various projects are connected with one another. You show the wonderful scanning of the altar of the Basilica that Adam was showing. I mean, what could you do with such a 3D model? Well, one thing is that you can inspect, you can analyze it, but maybe also you want to connect it to other types of information or other types of document. For instance, of course, this is a very well-documented altar, which is in the documentation of the Fondazione Cini, represented in many photos of the Cini Phototech. And that's interesting if you want to look at small details, variations, elements which have changed over time. But of course, this is only a door towards other types of connection, because what we've been working as part of the Replica project managed by Isabella Di Leonardo in the last years is process by which you can actually connect image with one another, even if they do not represent exactly the same thing. For instance, that very peculiar representation of the evangelists, which are holding the globe, and you have God on top of it. I mean, that's to some extent a pattern which has its own story. In particular, after the altar of the Cini, I mean, you had representation in the region where you would find, again, I mean, some type of sculpture which are extremely similar and which are propagating as a particular form of pattern. But the vision itself, or the inspiration itself for that painting, it's linked with other representation of the vision of Ezekiel, where you have the evangelist and God on top of a globe, of a planet. In other cases, just in confronting, I mean, with different wheels. I mean, this is part of the various interpretation of Ezekiel's vision, but it's a whole iconographic element. So these are, of course, elements for a visitor, either real or virtual, of the Basilicum, which are absolutely enriching the type of experience and reading of the church itself. The point is that, of course, one thing is to let's say, do these form of links manually through the know-how of art historians. But what we've been showing, working with Adam in the last years, is that it was actually possible, if you had access to a very large phototech like the one of the Cini Foundation, to do part of these elements automatically. And so in 2017, we presented a search engine, the Replica search engine, based on the scanning that was done using the Replica scanner, that was permitting to actually use directly some morphological research to look for elements which were similar in terms of shapes. Here I'm showing a pretty straightforward example on San Marco Square, where you actually find very easily all the various vedute of San Marco, and with possibilities not only of, let's say, finding global similarities, but also detailed search. I mean, that on any of these pictures, you can find a detail like the campanile and find all representation which have not the full representation of the piazza, but elements of the campanile systematically. So this is done entirely automatically, and it's a way of actively exploring the content of the photo library. And you see that this is immediately linked now with the experience you have when you visit, for real or virtually, the Cini Foundation. It has permitted, of course, to make a lot of discoveries. For instance, the fact that some paintings, which were apparently the same, were classified as being different and ordered in different places. And we developed specific ways to find and make sure there were actually real copies or representation of the same painting. And again, at that level, the machine vision were much more accurate than the possibility for human eye to tell the difference between very, very similar copies and two different photographs of the same object. And interestingly, not only here answering to queries, but trying to understand the space of the paintings themselves, we've been able, through the work of a young mathematician, Jeanne Fernandez, who joined the team along with Paul Guenek, with a new PhD student in our laboratory, to try to map the entire space of these paintings in order to not query what is similar to that particular detail, what is similar to that particular painting, but actually discover connections that were unknown, at least to all the similarities which were referenced based on our analysis. And so this is called the hypergraph, I mean the Marrow World hypergraph. And here I'm showing it to you on the paintings, but you should of course understand that now that we are entering the 3D world, any small detail inside the recording of the island itself is the beginning of a morphological link that can be related to other small details similar inside the same building, but one day also with other buildings and other recording in different places in the world. So I won't do much more, just also to leave a bit time for questions. But the point is that this is not only a model. I mean, what you have here on the recording of the island. It's a digital hypergraph. I mean, it's something which can be a superimposition over the real world, and that makes the real world interactive, that makes the real world queryable, that permits to make link between what you see and other information which has been recorded elsewhere. And 2 years ago, Kevin Kelly wrote an important article in Wired where he was actually retaking this mirror world term, which was a term invented by Gellert Nerd in 91, I mean, quite a long time ago, before the invention of the web. And he was arguing that what was coming through this arrival of this huge 3D model and the arrival of new augmented reality technique was not just another platform. It was actually something as important as the web that he called the first platform, the social network that he called the second platform. This would be the third platform. That means that on top of this new information system, which is having a one-to-one relation with the real world, there will be a whole ecosystem of activities that will be created. There will be a completely new type of information architecture to reinvent. And I think through what you've been saying in Adam's talk and the type of problematic I've just been mentioning, in a funny way, I mean, part of the invention, the concrete, let's say, prototyping of this new world starts precisely on this island in Venice, where probably for the first time in the world, we're trying to show what it could mean to have an actual mirror world of absolutely historically incredible place like the island of San Giorgio. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frédéric. So can you hear me?
Yep.
Brilliant. So I'm not sure if there have been any questions coming in, and I'm not sure how we should gradually wrap this up. But for me, you know, what we've done is really just the beginning, that we want to get a team back, for example, to record all of the Vatican pavilions that are on the island. We want to work more closely with the Institute of Music on other projects that are not just visual projects. But I have, I think, one question that obviously excites me a lot. But the Warburg Institute in London and A.B. Warburg's work on image-based, so on iconographic searches and iconographic study, how does that differ, would you say, from the ideas you were presenting just now about finding software that can identify, so machine learning software that can identify figures within a painting by their position or by their attitude or by the attributes that you select?
Well, I think clearly these are two different image systems, in a sense that what we've been dealing with is really what we can call the morphological link. The patterns we're seeking on the first place are patterns in which a shape is invented, and we have good reason to think it cannot be invented independently. For instance, when I'm showing you the second version inspired by the altar of the evangelist, which are having the globe and God on top of them. I mean, this given the similarity with the basilic altar, it's impossible that these two things popped up exactly in the same way. They might have a common denominator. You said for the corked map that this is maybe derivative map. So, but they have a relationship in the sense that these are not independent invention. In the case of the Warburg Institute and the iconographic mapping, here we're dealing with general ways of organizing figures, and they are like typologies. But what is grouped in the same categories, I mean, obviously it's possible that some of these representations are there, but do not have or do not share the same, let's say, phylogenetic link. They happen to have similar composition, and there are ways of understanding all the variation and the cultural variation in the world. In many cases, of course, they have a link, but it's a much less strong link than the one we are aiming for, and it's a link which is much more difficult to qualify historically. When we see a morphological link, we know somebody has seen something, and there is a chain of concrete causal consequences that has led to the connection between these two images. So I don't know whether this is answering your question, but I think both are super interesting, and there are machine learning techniques to recognize the categories like the one which are defined, I think, I don't know, 10,000 in the Warburg Institute. But that more categorization more than historical linkage. Yeah.
No, I mean, I find the whole emergence of a new type of connoisseurship in the digital world. And I mean, I think finding ways of reading data, not according to the way we as humans negotiate it, but actually reading other levels of data, which is what we've been trying to do with Case Western Reserve University, and which I'll be talking about in November there. But I'm very excited about getting away from a world where we're just looking for the names of stars, so Raphael, El Greco, whoever it is, but where we're actually understanding that both Raphael and El Greco in that example were working with relatively large teams of people. And I think this idea of the lone artist working on their own, confronting their soul in their studio, is something which isn't helpful in understanding the vast majority of visual representations. And I think,
Adam, there's something interesting which I think people should understand, is that we are probably moving from tools for inquiry, where you look for something, you're an artist and you have an idea about a pattern, and the system helps you finding and searching in large collections, to situation where it's the machine which is detecting issues or interesting things. One immediate thing we had with the Cini work is that among the things that were detected, there were, in the analysis of the photo text, there were more than 1,000 paintings which had uncoherent attributions. And this, as a corpus, is super interesting. Sometimes this is an historical issue. It has been solved. We know, who is the right one. Sometimes these are unknown elements that can be maybe looked upon, but also in many cases, it shows precisely how various forms of connoisseurship have been, in fact, moving in various direction, and permits to pop up new hypotheses. And that was unknown because all the cardboards which are organized in the Cini, are organized by names. And so, and we're talking about 1 million. And so you never know that actually on that particular places, on that particular scaffold, there's an image which happened to be the same 500,000 images before. It's impossible for human mind to know more than 30,000 paintings. So it's this is super interesting because it immediately shows examples. And what we're doing, and what we're trying to do with morphological analysis and new mathematical techniques is going beyond the query now and say, look, here we have 2 paintings which are sharing something which cannot be more than chance. These were unknown, as far, or at least to the system and to us. Could you confirm this is a link? Yes or no? And progressively, these morphographs, which is an idea we craft with Isabella Di Leonardo and Benoît Seguin, they is getting more and more precise. And this is, I think, for history of art, this is really a moment of great transformation.
For me, the real excitement, and I think the excitement for a younger generation coming through, is the realization actually of just how much work is still to be done, which, I don't mean that in a daunting way, with Sisyphus or something, thinking, oh my God, I've got to do this. It's that kind of work. But it's actually, I remember when I was a student, very often in art historical lectures or other things, feeling that everything is presented as if it's already known. What I think is happening now is the realization of actually how little is known rather than how much is known. And that opens, I think, a whole new range of possibilities in terms of sharing, in terms of people getting involved, in terms of people finding their own areas of research. And I think if we can get technology to raise many, many, many more questions that it answers, then there'll be more and more work for people to do to find the answers, which can be very creative. So I sort of feel sometimes when I say things like that, it seems like one's entering into a weird glass bead game kind of world where you're playing cleverer and cleverer parallel games with smaller and smaller details. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels, as I was starting to look at Catherine Delano-Smith's work with the Gough map, or talking to Arnold Nesserat and saying, how do we know the Vatican tapestries were made from the cartoons in London? And the answer comes back, well, it's always an assumption that that was the case, but maybe they were the cartoons that were made for the Mantua tapestries, or for the set that's in Madrid, or for the set that was destroyed in Berlin. And I think it's this whole way of thinking that actually we can use technology to help us look in a different way, and in a way that will encourage us to see the object as a source of material evidence, which might be the kind of way it's been read before or might not. And the goal is very much to see the object from the eyes of the person who made it, to think their thoughts, to engage with the conversations that surrounded it. And, I love the idea that Raphael's studio was working on, on one hand, on reinventing antique sculpture, on taste, on designing interiors, on architecture, and also on building, the Cardinal Bibbiena's Stufetta, which, some claim is the first flushing toilet. And I love this way that, the world wasn't clearly divided up then, and it isn't again now. So I think there was this sort of 20th century when objects got stripped of their role as being complex subjects and got put on pillars to be appreciated for aesthetic value. And the thing that gives me most enjoyment is bringing back, for example, the Politico-Grafoni or the different projects we've been working on that allows a completely different insight into both the object as a whole and all of its constituent parts, which in a way runs parallel to, you know, how you subdivide the world digitally to effectively mean you can stream information coherently and fast on regular and normal computers. You know, my dream, and I'm sure it's the dream of everyone in archive, would be someone turns up and says, okay, build Venice like a computer game that people can move through in real time and engage with each other in real time. And, you know, of course, that's tens of years of work, but we can begin it. We can start to actually increase the depth at which we understand the environment that we're negotiating our way through. And, you know, every time I walk through Venice, you know, you see different things. You're noticing exactly how rich this world is and how little we normally pick up. And one of the things that the recording technologies demand is it kind of slows you down. So you have time to look at these things while you're recording them. And of course, all of the questions start popping out the minute you start thinking and talking. And I think sharing is the issue right now. How do we share Venice differently?
We have some questions.
We have some questions coming in.
Yeah, so I'm joining because the topic is still the same. And one that I collected from YouTube is if in the future, near or maybe not then near, you will share the data that you were collecting, like the pictures taken, and of course then the developing the confronting of the data, and if that will be somehow accessible, even maybe in part. And this is the first question for both of you. Then I have one for Professor Kaplan, but first I let you answer to this, if you please.
Shall I start, Frédéric?
Yeah, go.
Okay, so Factum Foundation has a very clear policy on sharing data. So we worked with the Victoria and Albert Museum with the REACH initiative to look at the recording and providing access to in-depth digital recordings, 2D, 3D, in Frédéric's parlance 4D too, but really on our side it's more 2D and 3D information. And the goal is to ensure that any potential benefits that can come, commercial benefits that can come, should belong to the institution whose role it is to look after that work. And for the rest of uses, it should be freely available. So where that's possible within copyright law and within the agreements we have, that is what is always done. So the data should be, and the goal of Factum and Archive is to ensure that, for example, the training videos that we're starting to make now, the Academy Online, should be freely available and people should be able to watch it. And the data itself for non-commercial uses should be freely available. So obviously there's a whole lot of negotiations going on at the moment as museums get involved in NFTs and in other ways of marketing, merchandising, and monetizing the things in their collection, which, unless they're fully thought through, I suspect will become very problematic in the near future. Frédéric.
Yeah. So I mean, EPFL clearly, I mean, is a knowledge Creation Institute. I mean, we are paid by the Swiss federal government to produce knowledge, so and to make it accessible at maximum. So we will push always in that respect, so that the maximum of the models are getting free. I mean, the questions on in fact on copyright issues are complex on these objects. I mean, they are new typically. I mean, what is exactly protected in this image? The general idea is that for me, if it's not protected as an object itself, I mean, its copy should be also free, especially if it's made through standard technology. That's essentially our position. So I really hope this model can be shared and make available and shareable.
Thank you. And this that you just said lets me to tell you that in the next future, in October, for AOA Archive Online Academy, we organized a course connected with copyright, and also one of the topics that we will discuss, not me, but the professionals in the sector that we invited, is also NFT. And so, well, yeah, the topic is hot. So thank you for telling this. And I collected also another question for Professor Kaplan, and is connected with the historic photographic collection of Fondazione Cini. Is if EPFL as a scientific publication about the project, replica project, and so on.
Yeah, many. There's many on our website called dhlab.epfl.ch. There's, I don't know, 10 or 12. Yeah, on different aspects. I mean, it's a project which has, of course, different aspects and history. There's entire also PhD thesis which is also published online on the subject. So yes, I think that there's material to read. Yeah.
Well, I think, unless Constanza, there are more questions coming in, I think that probably should be the moment where we wrap up. This is very much a work in progress. It's something that is clearly growing, and it's something that we hope through Archive, through the Fondazione Giorgio Cini, through EPFL and through Factum's Foundation, that people can get involved with, follow, be part of, and hopefully gain a lot from. So thank you very much for listening. Frédéric, thank you for joining from Lausanne, if that's where you are. And thank you to everybody here.